Hey, Bobby. Hey, Billy. Thanks for joining. I'm just letting people join in. We have quite a few people. This is a really popular event. We had over 116 registrations, so people are really excited about this event. And I'm just seeing the waiting room kind of being lit up. So I press admit all, and then there is a whole bunch more. So I appreciate your patience. Give me a minute. Okay, let's get started. So everyone, welcome. I'm Neha Scher-Shah, the chapter leader for IxDF Las Vegas, and I'm so glad that you all are here. This event is brought to you by the Interaction Design Foundation, a global community focused on advancing UX through learning, connection, and shared knowledge. So before we dive in, feel free to drop in the chat where you're joining us from. Some people already have. It'd be great to know where all of you are from, and I love to see how this community, how far reaching this community is. This is a quick note. This session is going to be recorded, so if you have to drop or there is any kind of glitch in your system, you can always come back to the recording. We will take questions in the end, and so post your questions in the chat, and I'll try and get to them as much as I can towards the end. So today, as you know from all of the material that I've posted online, we're excited to welcome Julie Francis, a UX CX researcher and strategist who's worked with some incredible teams at Meta, Google, Spotify, and The Gap. She brings a wealth of insight into journey mapping and how to make it a true driver of strategy and innovation. So Julie, on to you. Let's get started.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Neha. Thanks for joining today. Thanks to those of you that have your cameras on. It's always nice to know there are real people there in a webinar. And I just say thank you to you for joining, and Neha, again, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to your group. So who in the world am I? I am an independent UX and CX researcher and strategist, and I'm currently consulting after my post-Meta chapter. So I work with companies to help them align their teams on the biggest opportunities to improve the user or customer experience and produce big shifts in key metrics. That's why companies bring me in. Journey maps are my favorite approach to do that, my favorite framework. And I've been an independent consultant for most of my career, actually, although I did recently spend 5 years in-house at Meta, where I joined the team to focus on virtual reality. And in fact, that's why I went in-house. I couldn't resist the opportunity to go play in VR for a few years. But now I'm back to consulting again, and I work with a very wide range of companies. So as Neha said, most recently I've been working with The Gap and Google and Meta. And then in my pre-Meta consulting days, I worked with companies like Spotify, Lyft, Walmart, Southern California Edison, and many, many others. Most of my work informs strategy, innovation, and roadmap prioritization. I am not a designer. I'd actually be curious to know if there are designers that are here today who are researchers, and also if they're researchers. I've kind of optimized this for more of a design audience, but we are going to touch on some research as well. If you are beginning the session wondering what in the world a journey map is and why you should care, don't worry, because we're going to start today with some level setting about that. So what are we going to cover? We are going to start with what is a journey map, how can a journey map be helpful, different types of maps. And this is something that I actually find people are often very confused about. There's so much diversity in journey mapping, it kind of makes it unclear what we're talking about when we say the term journey map. And then we're going to delve into what I get really excited about, which are the most common pain points associated with journey mapping and what I've arrived at in terms of principles that you can take on in order to help you boost the impact of your journey mapping. We're going to do a deep dive on 2 of those principles in particular, because I wanted to focus mostly on things that I thought would be most relevant to designers, but also people who were involved in research. And at the end, we are going to have time for Q&A. So if you would please just add your questions to the chat. Neha is going to keep track of that. If you see another question posted you really like, give it a thumbs up or something so Neha will know those are the ones that we should upvote. Okay. When you Google for examples of journey maps, you get this incredibly huge range. And so what this makes clear is that it's not a standard set of design elements that make for a map. And so if that's the case, then what in the world do we mean when we say journey map? Well, of course, I asked ChatGPT. And I was actually surprised. I liked what ChatGPT came up with. So ChatGPT says a journey map is a visual representation of a person's experience as they interact with a product, a service, or a process over time. A journey map captures the various touch points, emotions, and actions involved, sometimes, helping organizations understand and improve the user's overall journey. That is indeed why we do this. My definition is quite a bit simpler, many fewer words. I say that a journey map is an illustration of a person's experience with a thing, can be anything, over time. And so when we say a person's journey, this is another area where people get confused. What are we talking about when we say a person's journey? Well, there's a couple of things depending on your sphere of influence. So a person in a journey map could be a buyer. A buyer journey focuses on the pre-sale experience. So this is the domain of marketers, maybe going from awareness through purchase. Or the person in your journey map could be a user. And so a user journey map focuses on the post-purchase experience, possibly the post-login experience. And you can look at a person's entire end-to-end experience as a journey, and that's when we say the term customer journey. So a customer journey is inclusive of both buyer journeys and user journeys. And why should you care about journey mapping? Why should you consider this for your company or your client? There's lots of reasons people do this. One, a journey map can be a very useful tool for helping teams understand who they're solving for, people's experiences, their needs, if the feature or product is live already, what's working well, what's not working well. Second, a journey map can be far more engaging than yet another deck that gets lost somewhere in the org. Journey maps tend to have more staying power, and they tend to be more visible in companies. Done well, they tend to be more visible. Third, journey mapping, when it's done well, builds internal cross-functional alignment. It can really help break down silos in an org, and that is what I would say is the superpower of a journey map. Very good for getting people on the same page and what to do about it, right? Getting them aligned on not only what do we know, but what are we going to do about it? So when this understanding of the user journey meets that alignment on what to do about it, that's where the magic happens, because journey maps that are used in this way can really help create shifts in KPIs, key performance indicators. And of course, I'd like to share lots of case studies with you, but it's very hard to get your hand on case studies. Why? Because the data is always proprietary. Companies don't want us to go out there and share metrics. And in fact, you're going to see lots of examples of journey maps today, and they're all blurred, and I apologize for that. It's just that journey maps, by definition, include data that is sensitive, and I always have to blur things. In fact, I'm generally not even going to tell you what the company was. Okay, but here's one case study I do have. This is from a customer experience consultant and strategist named Sarah Wallace. She has a company called Proprietary Insights. And this is from her work with an enterprise software company. And what you can see in this image is the team, very diverse team, involved in a workshop where they are working together to align on what they consider to be what's working well and what's not working well for their customers. So what happened as a result of this workshop and then the journey map that Sarah created? Well, they had a 132% boost in customer satisfaction. And that's the kind of impact that senior leaders love, and one of the reasons that we do journey mapping. So why did this company bring Sarah in? Well, they knew that their customer satisfaction scores were not looking good. They didn't know why. There was a lot of internal arguing about what they should do next and what the problems were. So Sarah planned this workshop. Cross-functional partners rolled up their sleeves, worked together, had sometimes very hard conversations that were obviously helpful. And they identified, again, the phases people go through in their journey, the key pain points, and they started talking about what might we do about this. And they made some changes to their processes. Sarah took the output from that workshop and she created this very simple journey map. This is not going to win any design awards. This is not going to be in a museum. However, it was incredibly useful. So again, they made changes to their internal processes because of the experience they had aligning together on the biggest opportunities and what to do about them. And they had that 132% boost in customer satisfaction. Journey mapping can help identify bottlenecks. inefficiencies, pain points, and solving those can influence a very wide range of KPIs, far beyond just customer satisfaction. So for example, a journey map could influence broad business KPIs like conversion or retention, or customer-centric measures, again, customer satisfaction, operational efficiency metrics, so customer support ticket volume, employee satisfaction, and so forth. So clearly a journey map can be powerful. That's why we do this, but let's loop back again to what a journey map is. So my definition, an illustration of a person's experience with a thing over time, sounds a whole lot like just any old infographic. What's different about a journey map is that it's a visual that has an over time piece. So it is the over time piece of this that makes it a journey map. That's one thing all journey maps share. The time element in a journey map is generally represented on the x-axis, horizontal, as the steps that unfold over time. Small numbers of steps are grouped into larger phases. And if your map has a grid-like appearance, and not all journey maps do, you could think of these as your columns. The time frame, however, varies dramatically from map to map. And this is another thing that people get really confused about. A map can show an experience that unfolds over minutes, or days, or weeks, or months, or even years. And why is that? It's because just like a geographic map, a journey maps have different levels of zoom based on the realm of concern. So there are macro maps that are zoomed out, very high level. There are macro journeys that are very focused, very zoomed in on a small part of the person's experience. Some people call macro journeys relationship journeys because they're a high level view at the end-to-end experience. For example, the entire customer life cycle from initial awareness through post-purchase. And these macro journeys, because they take that high level view, tend to be relevant to the most senior leaders and to a very diverse group of people across a company. They often inform strategy, roadmap prioritization, investments, innovation, and so forth, even team structure. Macro journeys generally have much longer time frames. For example, experiences that take place over months or even years. And people get really confused about the fact that a company or a team can have more than one journey map, and this is why. So there are macro journeys, but then nested in to macro journeys, there can be a lot of micro journeys. And a micro journey is a much narrower look. It's a slice, small part of a person's experience. For example, it could be just using a specific feature. Tends to be a much shorter time frame. Again, this could be minutes, it could be days, it could be weeks. Microjourneys are typically used for different objectives. So supporting a design sprint, supporting a marketing campaign. And again, multiple microjourneys can ladder up to a parent touch point in the macro journey. And when a company begins to have a whole bunch of microjourneys laddering up, that's when companies begin to struggle with how do we organize all these so we're clear how they relate to each other. And that may be the point when they adopt a journey mapping management tool like they do, Scher-Shah, Journey Track. There's many out there these days. Okay, so a map is not just a timeline. There's a lot of other information on a journey map, and those are things that are included in the rows. We also call those swim lanes in the journey mapping world, and these are highly variable from journey map to journey map. Why? Because those swim lanes are determined based on your map's objective, your map's audience, the insights that you've collected, the culture of the team or the company. So here are some examples of common swim lanes. What the user is thinking, feeling, or doing, often an emotional trend line where you can at a glance tell what the high points are in the journey and the low points in the journey. Pain points, what's not working, and very importantly, the biggest opportunities to improve the experience. Those are either included in the journey map or there's a blank space for those in the journey map so that the map can be used in a workshop and those opportunities can be identified collaboratively. I really like the way Nielsen Norman breaks a map into 3 zones. You can think of these 3 key zones as first, the lens. This is like the focus of your map. What's the persona, the actor, the segment that's the focus of this journey? And then what's the scenario? What are we mapping? Zone B is what they call the heart of the map. These are things like the phases in the journey, what the person's thinking, doing, feeling. And then zone 3 is the output. So this is business goal related. Pain points, what are we going to do about it? Here are the internal teams that own these things. I'm almost done with all the level setting. I promise we're going to get to the juicy stuff in a minute. But also there's different kinds of maps. People get confused about this. So there are current state maps, which some people call as is maps. This is what the experience looks like today. And generally, if you're going to change the experience, come up with a future state map, you got to start here by understanding what is and is not working. But there are also future state maps, which some people call to be maps. And again, those are just the North Star of the experience that you would like to deliver. Then a further layer is there are service design maps, service design blueprints. Those are far more detailed because those are looking at not only what the customer's experience is, but also what's happening internally, what we call backstage, that works to produce this negative experience. Data sources, processes, tools, and so forth. And a service design blueprint and service design map can also be either current state or future state. Okay, journey maps often include what we call moments of truth or moments that matter. These are critical make or break points. These are the design elements in your map that you really want a person's eye to go towards. So what does that mean? You want to identify where the customer or the user has the opportunity to form or reform their impression of your brand, your feature, your company. These moments of truth are where you need to move the needle. For example, reducing calls to customer support. And again, you really want to include these because if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority, right? So you really want a way to guide the user's eye to what matters the most. There is huge diversity in maps, and these are very ugly, and I'm including them just so that you can see, and I know you're designers, you're probably cringing, ugly journey maps can actually have impact. Shocking, but it's true. So you can make a journey map in a workshop out of butcher paper and Post-it notes with some Sharpies. This image on the bottom left is from a workshop that I conducted at Meta. This was the first time in Reality Labs focused on VR we had ever done a journey map. And I didn't need to go further than this. I actually did hire a designer and they made something that looked better and nobody used it because the impact happened through the workshop in creating this really ugly journey map. You can also do that on a whiteboard with a marker, or you can do it on a digital whiteboard like Miro or Mural using digital stickies. Or you might just use a table and a deck. And I'm actually going to let you take a closer look at that very simple journey map later on in our talk. So again, a map can be high impact even if it's very low design polish and incredibly ugly. It kind of doesn't matter what it looks like, it matters what it does. In contrast, sometimes it does make sense to invest more time and resources making something that is higher design polish. Why? If you put design polish on something, it conveys this is important. So it might be for your audience or for your objectives, you want to convey this is important, and then you would want to put some design polish on it. You probably wouldn't do that if you were just going to use it for a design sprint, right? One and done. It's only going to live for a week. We don't need to put design time into this. I give way more examples in the course that I teach, which I'll tell you more about in a moment, but I just wanted to give you a peek at the diversity of the maps, and we are going to look a little bit more closely at some of these. Okay. Back to our definition of what a journey map is. This is my favorite definition. This is from my ex-Meta colleague, Catherine Lovazano, who's now a research manager at Google. And I like this because she focuses on why we create journey maps instead of on what a journey map is. She says, a journey map is a way of organizing insights for the purpose of shared understanding and action. And if your map achieves shared understanding and action, then your map has had impact. The way that you achieve shared understanding and action is not by focusing on the map as a deliverable that you hand over to people as a finished thing. It's by bringing them along in the journey of creating the journey map. This impact piece of journey mapping is the single biggest pain point associated with journey mapping. People put a lot of time and energy into doing the research, creating the artifact, and then they're shocked because people don't use it. They don't succeed in moving the needle on key performance indicators or key metrics. So a lot of time and money goes into this, and then people are really disappointed. Companies are frustrated. They put all this time and money into it, and nothing changes. Yet again, nothing changes, right? So what do we do about that? I'm going to share principles and best practice for creating a journey map that maximizes impact. And these principles and best practices come from my own consulting experience, my experience at Meta, but also from the experience of others. So of course, as a researcher, I'm a real nerd about research. So I actually arrived at these by interviewing other journey mappers. So I talked to designers, customer experience professionals, researchers, very senior leaders, anybody involved in creating maps or using maps. And I asked them, what have you learned from your successes, but also what have you learned from your failures? And what advice would you give to other people? And this leads me to the 5 principles for journey maps with impact, and what I, as a journey mapping nerd, call the meta map of mapping, the journey map of journey mapping. And basically, as a journey mapper, you're going to go through 4 phases. Each of these phases has common pain points. So in the first phase, the initiation phase, this is where you are launching a journey map project. And the biggest pain point here is something you feel later in the process, but if you don't get very focused at this point, you're going to have problems later on. So in this first phase of journey mapping, what you need to do is get focused, meaning you need to get clarity and alignment on why you're creating this journey map and who this map is for. Next, what you do is you go into the investigation phase. This is where you're either conducting research or summarizing existing research. Biggest pain point here is that there's no time to do journey-focused research, not enough data to draw on. And that leads to principle number 2, that maps with impact are rooted in very solid insights. The third phase of creating a journey map is the illustration phase. Again, I suspect this is very interesting to many of you. This is where you're wrangling everything into a visual, and it is really a process of wrangling. It's not easy to get from all of this data to something that is concise and very clear. Biggest pain point here is that you end up with way too much data on your map. Total dump of everything that you know. This is something I personally really struggle with, and I'm going to show you examples of maps that have included way too much data because they tried to be all things to all people, which loops us back to that first principle, that you need to be focused, right? You need to be prioritized. Who's the main audience of this map? What's the main objective of this map? And do we need more than one version because we've got different audiences and different objectives? So you need to customize your map. The final phase of creating a journey map is when you launch it and you're sharing your map. The biggest problem here is that maps are launched with all this fanfare. Yay, I had a workshop, it was successful, people seem to really like it, and then boom, nobody uses it anymore. The initial excitement wears off. It's super frustrating. Again, nothing changes. So this leads to the 4th principle, which is that your journey maps need to be integrated. You need to work to make sure that they are accepted and they're acted upon, meaning people know how to use them as part of their existing workflows. And there's a 5th underlying principle that runs through all the others, and that is that your journey maps need to be collaboratively created. Okay, if you leave here today with only one word in your brain, I would like that word to be collaboration, because this is the one thing that more than anything else differentiates journey maps with impact. And this is interesting for me because I have been a vendor for so long. And one of the things that my time in House at Meta really showed me is this kind of foundational work really needs to have very strong internal collaboration. If you, as of sitting outside as a vendor, if you just go off and do the work and throw your deliverable over the fence, it's not going to have as much impact as it would if you're able to get your client to let you help them do it collaboratively. So a strong partnership with your internal client can really make a difference in terms of maps having impact. This is kind of a strange way to prove the importance of collaboration, but I really love these cake recs. And by the way, if you go to cakerecs.com, you can see so many fun examples of these. I think these are real, although it's kind of hard to believe. But on the left, you see this very pretty cake with pink roses for somebody's 35th birthday, and then the words, "Can you draw a unicorn?" I mean, any buttercream is fun, but it would have been more fun if it was actually a unicorn. And then on the right, you see just balloons, like very descriptive. Those are just balloons. So what does a cake rec have to do with journey maps? Well, clearly the person that had the frosting bag in their hand didn't fully understand the written words on the order form. Total communication breakdown. And shocking. The meaning and intention would have been so obvious through a conversation, but somehow they didn't get it in what was written. So if a document with a bunch of words was good enough, we wouldn't end up with cakes like this. If a document with a bunch of words was good enough, we wouldn't go to so many meetings, right? Y'all wouldn't be here right now. because so much of what we accomplish happens through conversation and collaboration. And that is really clear with journey mapping and frankly, any other kind of foundational work, whether it's personas or jobs to be done. You really need to do this as collaboratively as possible. I got these cake recs from a guy named Jeff Patton, who has a book called User Story Mapping for Product Managers. And Cake Recs has given us permission to use these. So please, when you have a spare moment, go check out cakerecs.com because it's really fun. There's a guy named Jim Callback who has a really great book out on journey mapping. It's called Mapping Experiences. If you decide to check out this book, make sure you get his second edition. I highly recommend it. And one of the things that Jim Callback says that I really like is you need to focus on the verb, not on the noun. The verb of journey mapping, not on the noun, the journey map. The map doesn't provide the answers. It's just a platform for conversation. It's less about the map, the artifact, the deliverable, and it is far more about the process. So to make maps with more impact, we got to focus less on the map itself, less on making it pretty, less on a portfolio piece, although, you know, we all want a good portfolio piece. We need to focus more on the mapping, the activity of understanding our users and documenting their experiences and then aligning internally on what it means, what to do about it. This is the crux of why we create journey maps. So let me double click on that. This is the single biggest problem that we see from people who are frustrated with how their journey maps have gone. When they create maps in isolation, when they hire a designer and the designer comes back and hands over something finished, internally even, when a researcher and a designer go off and do something by themselves, that map is far more likely to fall flat and gather dust. So for maximum impact, you really need to use a collaborative approach from start to finish with your journey mapping. All right, now we're going to take a peek at each of those 4 principles. We're going to start with the first principle, which is that during the initiation phase, you need to be focused. If you don't get focused in the beginning, again, it's going to come back to haunt you later on in the process. So I want you to imagine that someone comes to you and says, we need a website. And you, as a designer, you're like, yeah, I can do that. I know how to do that, but who is it for and what would you like it to do? Or in the research world, people come to us and say, we need focus groups or we need usability testing. And it turns out that's just the term they learned in business school. That's not actually what they need. What they need are insights that are going to inform a particular decision, right? So you've learned in design to ask questions. I've learned in research to ask questions. What are you trying to accomplish? It's the same with journey mapping. Somebody comes to you and says, we need a journey map. They might as well have said, we need a document, right? So you need to go find out, what in the world is this for? As Harry Brignall says, when you hear the term journey map, think of a broad term like document. It can be anything that you need it to be. So what do? I actually achieve this through a very simple alignment process early in the process of creating a journey map. When a client comes to me and says, hey, we want a journey map, I take them through a process where we articulate together, what are we mapping? Why are we doing this? Who is it for? Who's the actor in the journey? A segment, a persona. When is the time frame of this? Are we talking about a journey that takes place over years? Related to that, when do we need this to land? If this is related to strategy, you want it to land during that planning season. If it's related to a design sprint, it needs to land before the design sprint, right? So you need to get really clear so it doesn't land at the wrong time, because that also contributes to it not being used. And then finally, with whom? I go into way more detail on this in the course that I teach, but also in some of my LinkedIn articles, so you can check that out. With whom you really want to identify the inside the company, if you're a vendor, or your colleagues who are going to help be champions for that map, collaborators, contributors, and so forth. Okay, now we're going to jump over to principle number 2. The highest impact maps are data-based. And of course, given that I'm a researcher, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm not going to torture you with that today. We'll just do a quick peek at a qualitative approach to research. That way, if you're doing your own research or you're partnering with a researcher, you'll be better prepared to get those insights. So if you don't have journey-focused research, there are things that you can turn to instead. It is a best practice to do research that focuses on the journey itself, and I will show you how I do that. But you can also turn to existing research, whether that's qualitative or quantitative surveys. You can turn to behavioral data, site analytics, logs. You can also look at things like customer support metrics, voice of the customer data, sales, retention, churn, and so forth. But how do I do my interviews as a qualitative researcher? I interview people one at a time. We do not do focus groups for journeys because people's journeys are so unique. How do I do this? I use this very simple approach that I learned from a researcher named Beverly Freeman. She's now over at Google. You just take this worksheet into interviews and you just fill it out with sticky notes during the interview. So I use those little tiny sticky notes. And the x-axis is the timeline. The y-axis is ranging from positive to neutral to negative. And this is what I do in an interview. I just ask people to tell me their story. I tell them I'm trying to understand their experience over time, the high points, the low points, everything in between, and I model it for them. So I usually give them a silly example like, let's pretend I'm telling you about my journey buying a donut this morning. God, do I wish I bought a donut this morning, but I generally don't. But I come up with something goofy for them. If I'm doing an in-home, I something in their house that inspires me, just to kind of model for them what I'm looking for. So, okay, I got the idea of buying a donut actually last night when I was watching a movie. And then when I woke up this morning, I was still thinking about donuts. And so I decided that I would stop here, but actually I would consider going there. And then here's how I made my decision on what to get. And then I had sprinkles all over myself in the car. And so I'm kind of modeling, here's the level of detail that I'm looking for. And I encourage them to tell to me as a story, just like they would tell it to a friend. I did this, and then I did that, and here's how I was feeling, and this was awesome, and that was terrible. Blah. And as they're talking, I'm placing these stickies on that x-axis. And then after you've got the steps, you loop back and you ask them to explain the highs and the lows to you. So I explained to people that there's this horizontal line. Everything above that is in the positive territory. So there's a little smiley face there. Everything below it's in the negative territory. There's a frowny face there. And I asked them to tell me, like, what were the high points in this experience? And how were you feeling at that moment? If they get stuck talking about their feelings, some people do, you can use this thing called an emotional wheel that gives them a lot of vocabulary for, something besides happy or frustrated. And I let them tell me relative to each other, how high of a high is this? How low of a low is this? So you're going to start with the positives. You're going to come back and make sure you get all the negatives as well. And there's, of course, going to be, more than one positive and more than one negative generally. So why is this approach? Why does this work? It's actually based on something called the peak-end rule from behavioral economics. It's a guy named Daniel Kahneman. And according to Nielsen Norman, this is their definition. The peak-end rule is a cognitive bias that impacts how people remember past events. So intensely positive or negative moments are the peaks, and the final moments of the experience, the end, peak-end rule, are heavily weighted in our mental calculus. What that means is that people don't get an opinion of your company, your product, your feature based on a sum total of everything. There are moments that stick out to them because they're either positive or negative, and then how they were feeling at the end. And that's what we're trying to capture through this approach to interviewing. And of course, I'm going to tell you to use a collaborative approach to your data collection and also to your analysis. So if you're a designer partnering with a researcher, ask to go out in the field or ask to observe those webcam interviews and ask to have a peek. Do a wall walk, look at the mural as the insights start falling into place. Bring other people. You don't want just the designer and the researcher doing this. You want to bring in product. Maybe you bring in customer support. Maybe you bring in senior executives. You're bringing as many people as you can along on the process of the journey of collecting this data and analyzing this data so that when the insights land, they're kind of familiar to people, right? So you don't want people to look at a journey map and be overwhelmed because it's the first time they're hearing any of this. All right, moving on to principle number 3, your journey maps need to be customized. Once you've gathered all the insights, done all of your analysis, now you need to create an artifact. And this is probably the most fun phase for y'all. It can be really challenging because you've got so much data. But what you want to do is customize your map, including the amount of detail you include in it, looping back to that first phase where you got focused on the objectives and on your audience. But also you're going to take in mind things like your company or team culture, the tools people like to work in, and so forth. I'm going to give you several examples here because y'all are designers, so you're getting more examples than people generally get. And just remember that it kind of doesn't matter what it looks like, it matters what it does. This is another great quote from Catherine Lovazano of Google. You can have a simplistic looking journey map that does a good job. So it may not be necessary to put a lot of design polish on it. As UX researcher and designer Boone Sheridan says, don't trap it in amber, aim for low fidelity design and high fidelity ideas. You may want to create high fidelity design because you're looking for a portfolio piece, but again, depending on the audience, it may not be necessary. Back to that example I did, that map I showed you from Meta that was butcher paper and sticky notes. Why did that work? It was cultural because we were moving so fast. And in fact, I hired a designer to make a better looking version of that. Nobody used it. We had planned to go through another iteration and we canceled it because it just wasn't necessary. It had informed the decision it needed to inform. We changed the priorities of what was on the roadmap and the team was ready to move on. Okay, I gave you a peek at this very simple map. This was created in Google Slides by a guy named Mitchell Gould, who's a consultant to Southern California Edison. And he chose Google Slides to make this. Why? Because he wanted it to be super easy for people to access and very easy for people to keep it updated, because that's how the team works. And this is not pretty, right? This is so simple, and yet it had a lot of impact. Why did it have a lot of impact? Because the team this was intended for was like, this allows us to slot this into how we work. We work in slide decks. This works really well for us. This was actually created after a far more beautiful version created by a vendor that was rejected by this client. Like, this is too much for us. We don't want all of this. And so Mitchell made it more simple, put it in Google Slides. There's no one answer to which tool that you should use. It absolutely depends. And again, you want to think about who is this for? How are they going to use it? What's the objective? And that's going to help determine the solution that you use. If you're thinking, okay, a really ugly journey map like that would never fly with my team, honor that instinct because this is cultural. There was a researcher that I was working with who made a journey map on her own. She didn't have great design chops. It was not very pretty, fell flat. No one paid attention to it. And as a last ditch effort, she decided to bring in a designer to clean it up. And all of a sudden it started getting traction. In her company, this kind of polish mattered. The culture of her company was, if you want me to take this seriously, put some design polish on it. So it can be really important depending on who you're working with. Know your audience. I'm going to show you a few examples now of maps that have a little bit more design polish on them. Again, I apologize, these are blurred out. It's just the nature of journey mapping. I really like this clean style from a designer named Sarah Lawrence of Design Emporium. She does a lot of work with the journey mappers at Meta, and I work with her a lot. And I think one thing that she does very well is use illustrations to make a map more visually engaging. So this is just an example of a grid approach. So you've got your columns, you've got your rows or your swim lanes, and she's adding illustrations in there where she can to guide your eye to the things that are most important. This is another example from her. There are several things that I really like about this map. One is that Sarah managed to include a lot of insights. If you look in the middle part of the map, you're going to see a bunch of donuts. There's our donuts again. Those are quant survey results. She managed to pull in quotes from qualitative research, quant data, metrics, and she managed to do that without making this map too busy, too dense. I also really like that on the right-hand side, you'll see a vertical box. What that says is more research is needed. And so this team was like, oh God, we don't really understand this last part of the journey. We haven't done enough research. And they just owned it. Instead of like faking it till they made it, they just said more research is needed. And it literally says on there, keep an eye on this space for an updated version of this map. And then down at the bottom, there's a swim lane that is the opportunities. It's called Your Turn. And that's blank because they wanted to use this map in workshops. And so instead of the researcher saying, here are my ideas for what this means, they left it blank so that the team could come up with that. Because again, you want those ideas to be coming from the team because you're building alignment as they're coming up with those ideas. This same researcher, whose name is Karen Plemons, she's an amazing journey mapper at Meta. again, worked with the designer, Sarah Lawrence, and created a board game version of a journey map. So her product team actually includes a lot of people who are nerds about board games. And so when she suggested this to them, they really liked the idea. And Karen felt that one of the reasons this board game was successful is that she, built buy-in for the idea of having a board game. She actually created prototypes of this board game that the team could play test with her. She took their suggestions on how to make the game more fun, more engaging, and they actually play this game in their regular game nights, which is like, I mean, I've heard so many stories of people creating games for like personas and stuff, and they don't really get used. This is cultural. On her team, it was worth this, right? It was worth the investment. They love it, and it really helped them understand the user's journeys. They have these cards that are like boosts, which is like something that goes well in the experience that makes the game go better. And then people draw cards that are like friction or conflict that suddenly like, kicks them back to, square one or so forth. So they can really feel those pain points and those moments of delight in the user's experience. This game is not the only version of this journey map, right? This has a place, but this is not where work happens. So there's also a deck that accompanies this game because, the way that we work, we need decks as well. Okay, this is an example from a designer named Berthold Schroeder, and it includes a clearer emotional trend line. It's very common in journey maps to see an emotional trend line, which just guides your eye to the high points and the low points in the person's journey. You also see these different size red dots. That's indicating how significant of a pain point this is. So those are the moments of truth that you want to guide people's eyes to. This is an example from my own work, something I created at Meta with a New Zealand-based researcher and journey mapper named Nick Beaumast. And this was intended to be a single source of truth about the end-to-end journey. We were trying to ground people in the problem space, and we wanted this to last for a few years. It did. It hung in a major thoroughfare at Meta back when we were all in the office. And 2 years later, people were still engaging with this map. So in this case, we felt that high production value, design polish made sense. And we decided to use a more narrative approach. So there is a time element here, but there's no clear like grid-like approach. There's no swim lanes. It's more of a story that you kind of get lost in. This is another piece of work that I did with Nick Beaumast. This is older. This is from about 10 years ago. And I'm sharing this with you because I learned a lot from this journey map. This map was also intended to be a single source of truth. Everything this client knew about the in-store shopping experience. And it just didn't have the impact we hoped it would. In hindsight, I think it's because this map tried to be all things to all people. There were a whole bunch of swim lanes that were only interesting to some teams, not all teams. There was so much data in here. And we might have been more successful if we'd made multiple versions of this map or just said, these are interesting things, but they're not the most important things. Get them out of here. And again, that's this kind of experience is what led me to that focus principle. Ask your team, ask your client, who are the main audiences for this? What are the main objectives? And then you optimize your map for that. So do as I say, not as I do, or as I did. You want to resist the urge to include everything that you know, because then you end up with an encyclopedia. So there's a researcher who used to be at Meta, who's now at Netflix, named Ignacio Contreras, and he says, I see journey maps and I get overwhelmed immediately. If the goal is to have people understand and implement, you need to cut some content. The most successful of my journey maps is the most visual. It's more important that it's visual than all the information is there. And what Ignacio is referring to here is that a map that went through 5 or 6 iterations, they started with an assumptive map that was just based on like secondary research they could find. They went out and did some research. They up-leveled the map with better insights. They did more research. They up-leveled the map with more insights. They were getting ready for an offsite. He hired a designer. And it was like data explosion. Well, there's way too much detail in here. People weren't using it. So they hired a different designer, reduced the information density, and that's the one the senior leadership loves. But they still use the detailed version because it's super helpful for onboarding new people who join the team. So he does see value in having a more detailed map, but in terms of the primary objective, which is to influence the strategy, he needed a version that was more geared to senior leaders. Karen Plemons of Meta says something very similar. She says, you can't have a million data points and also have it be legible and easily digestible. So pare it down. Okay, speaking of a million data points, back to my cringy too detailed map. This client actually brought me back in last year to help them. So this is about 10 years later. We did very similar research, although this time we were looking at the omni-channel shopping experience, not just the store experience. And this time I said to the client, what's the primary objective? Who's the primary audience? And so forth. And we said, okay, the primary audience is this. We're not optimizing the map for this other audience, even though they're also important. I also gave this client a bunch of different examples of journey maps and said, which one of these best aligns with what you're expecting? Do you want hand-drawn illustrations? Do you want it to be grid-like? Do you want it to be more of a narrative? Do you want screenshots? Like, there were so many decisions that we were able to make by the client just seeing lots of examples in the beginning and us making sure that we were aligned. And it led us to two really important decisions. This is just a peek at this map. One was that they loved the illustrations. So we included illustrations in that very detailed map. And those illustrations can just stand on their own and tell the story of what this user experience is like. So they wanted illustrations. They also recognized that they were having a lot of problems with the right hand and the left hand fighting with each other. They were working in silos. They weren't working as a team. It was creating a really disjointed omni shopping experience. And so they wanted to do whatever they could to build alignment across these two silos. So they wanted this map to be optimized for workshops. And that's exactly what we did. That's why this map is not super pretty. It was created in Miro. Like, those are actual digital stickies that are summarizing the key insights. And they can hide those swim lanes if they need to and take this straight into a workshop. So one of the most important deliverables for this was actually the workshop plan. And of course, we made more than one version. So for the most senior executives, we didn't want them to be lost in a sea of all this data. So there's actually a one-page version which sits in a PowerPoint deck. And you can imagine how hard it was to go from this detailed illustration, which tells at a high level what's working and what's not working about this experience, and make it fit on one page. But it was so important because it's the underpinning of the strategy. And this versions of this map have been shared now with like 40,000 employees across the world to illustrate for them, this is why we're making this change to our omni-channel strategy. We also made a really fabulous video that accompanied this with animated illustrations. So this was done by a guy named Creighton Berman, who's a really great illustrator. Okay, I just glanced at time and I'm getting a little short, so I might streamline some of this. So thinking again about customizing your map, again, you got to customize based on your objective. If this is for a design sprint, polish probably doesn't matter. It'll be short-lived. If it's for strategy, longer shelf life, put some more design polish on it. Your data. What kind of data do you have? If you don't have solid research insights, probably best to not put a lot of design polish on it, because you're going to send the wrong signal that, if you put design polish on it, it's going to look like this is based on solid insights. Your audience. Again, is this for senior leaders? Get rid of a bunch of detail. If it's for the team that's involved in executing, they're going to need more detail. Doing a little double click on swim lanes related to the objective. So your swim lanes are going to vary dramatically from project to project, map to map. If your goal is designing or road mapping, you're wanting to focus on building a shared understanding, and you might include rows like what the user's thinking, feeling, doing, an emotional trend line, pain points, touch points, their needs, segment differences, data, so forth, so on. You might leave space for opportunities at the bottom. If it's for service design, there's going to be a whole lot more swim lanes, way more detail, and you're going to start getting into things like, here are the teams, here are the processes, here's the data sources, and so forth. And then finally, if it's for strategy, you're going to have way less detail, and you're going to include things like metrics and KPIs. You want to make your map easy to update. Like, it's shocking how many times I've heard from people that they worked with an external designer and they didn't own the map at the end, and they couldn't update the map without hiring the designer again to make updates. And also that they hire designers who then used a tool that's not used inside this company. So again, they can't make updates to it themselves. So if you're working with a vendor, or you are a vendor, just make sure you're using the preferred design tool and it's clear from the contract who owns what. And if you use something like Keynote or Google Slides or even Mural or Miro, it makes it much easier for you to keep your map up to date. Very big shock. I'm going to talk about collaboration again. In this customization creation of the map phase, this is another one where you're going to want to do this collaboratively. As Leon Waldall says, when people help cook it, they're far more likely to eat it. It's just like teaching your kids how to eat. So you want to include people in these decisions. And your goal is that when there's a final version of the map, the people who are the intended beneficiaries of this map, their reaction should be, yep, that's familiar to me. I have a sense of what's in here. I already have a sense of how I'm going to use this. If the people who are intended to use this map look at it cold, they will become overwhelmed, and their reaction is generally, oh, I think I'm going to have time next week to look at that. Actually, it could be like next month, but I'm going to look at that. And they never find the time because it's overwhelming. So if they're involved in the creation of the map, decisions about the swim lane, decisions about how much data to include, they're familiar with the insights. When that map lands, they're gonna feel oriented. It's gonna feel like it's something that they co-own with you. So very important to do this collaboratively. The fourth principle is that your maps need to be integrated, meaning that people have accepted the map. They've integrated into how they work. And again, you don't want to just throw your map over the fence. You have to bring them along for the journey. And I'm going to touch on this very quickly, but I go into much more detail about this in the course that I teach and some of my articles I've written in LinkedIn, because this is so incredibly important. Workshop, workshop, workshop. You want to reveal the map to people over time, help them use it, and help them keep using it. So if you're a vendor, this is a little bit tricky. But what I do is I actually deliver workshop plans to my clients so that they can continue using the map after I'm gone. Okay, wrapping up, back to our meta map of mapping, our journey map of journey mapping. To summarize, in order to maximize the impact of your journey maps, they need to be focused, grounded in data, customized to your objectives, your audience, your culture, integrated into existing processes, and collaboratively created. And if you found this helpful, you can check out my articles on LinkedIn. Please link up. I'm very happy to answer questions after this session. If you want more, you can take my pre-recorded course on Udemy. That's about an hour and a half. That course has more case studies, more best practices, and I think of it as like a snack size option because it's about an hour and a half. Or if you really want to go deep, you can join one of my courses. So these are taught on Maven. The next cohort's coming up soon. It actually starts the week of April 7th. And that course is 12 hours over the course of a week. We do a mix of lectures and hands-on activities. So you will have experience interviewing people about their journeys, analyzing that data, and actually creating maps. There's this little visual on the right here, which is a poster that I give people. It's a digital poster. If you sign up to be notified about cohorts for that workshop, you get one of these digital journey map posters if you'd like one. I do also do custom workshops for teams. So people will bring me in for day-long workshops where we up-level the skills of their team. We may even create a journey map, first draft of a journey map that day. And often companies bring me in because they don't have the internal chops or bandwidth to create journey maps themselves. And so I'm training their internal team as we create a journey map together. And that is a wrap. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Neha for questions.
That was awesome. I was just looking up the link to your Udemy course so I could post it in the chat. I already posted the Maven link and also your LinkedIn profile so that they can connect with you if we are not able to answer all of the questions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for that amazing session. Thank you. It was chock full of insights, and I think there were so many things that I've never even thought about. So I learned a lot. We do have a lot of questions. I don't know if people have time or if you have time, but at least we can take a few. The highest voted question was from Bobby, and this one says, the make or break of most things comes down to buy-in from executives and stakeholders. How do you go about getting buy-in?
Oh, I could talk about this for a long time, Bobby. This is something I go into way more depth on in my course. And in fact, one of my students said to me recently, I keep trying to do journey mapping and people don't want to do it. And I'm like, then stop trying to do journey mapping. Like, this is cultural. Your team is not ready for this. Maybe you can do a little bite-sized something. Like, what I try to do is I start having conversations with senior. This is when I was in-house at Meta. Because, of course, clients don't come to me if they don't want a journey map, right? They already know they want one if they land in my inbox. When I was in-house at Meta, a lot of people that I was working with weren't familiar with journey mapping. And so I would, as we were talking about, most important pain points, I might sketch on a whiteboard. Like, it feels like if you think about this as a journey, it seems like here's a high point, but we got some low points down here. Do you agree that these are like the low points? Oh, this is something called a journey map, by the way. We could make one of these if you wanted to. And so I'll just very casually start introducing people to the concept of a journey map, beginning to build buy-in, like, oh, that could be helpful. Maybe I'll share some case studies. Like when I was in-house at Meta, I had lots of case studies I could share because I was allowed to talk about the results. I can't do that with the work that I share with you today, but maybe you're able to come up with some case studies that you can share. So I start sort of very slowly building buy-in and doing a journey map once I feel like I've got enough people bought in. And part of the buy-in is that they're willing to put in the effort, because again, I don't want to just go off on my own and create it. I want to do it with them. And so they need to be really bought in. This is going to be valuable. And the other thing I do is I try to get a senior stakeholder to be my champion. And that is incredibly important because you want them to announce the work stream. You want them to tell teams, I want you to make time to go to those interviews. I want you to make time to go to those workshops. And in fact, you want them to kick off the workshop. You might want them to kick off the entire thing. Like, I will often start journey mapping with a kickoff. And in the kickoff, I always include the cake recs because I feel like they're such a great, silly little example of like, why are we doing this, right? Because I've handed y'all so many reports and nothing's changed. So we're going to do it in a different way this time. And that's fun. I often have actually purchased cakes for my workshops that have had their own really funny mistakes in them. So back in the day when companies had budgets, I bought cake. Hopefully that's at least a taste, Bobby, of what you were looking for in terms of how to build buy-in.
Yes, great information. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, maybe one more. So Maria asked, in the context of UX journey maps, how can intentional limitations and pain points, business rules, be designed to encourage users to pay for additional features? What are some ethical considerations when implementing these design choices?
That feels a little out of the scope of a journey mapping discussion. I don't think I have an answer for you that I can give you in the next 2 minutes. I apologize.
Maybe this is a offline conversation.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next one.
Okay,
so
great.
Julie asked, does this collaboration need to happen in one event, like a workshop, or can it be asking people here and there while sharing progress?
Absolutely the latter. So you want to look for a lot of opportunities. Again, that initial building buy-in happens when you have lunch with people. It happens when you have a meeting about something else. You start building buy-in, you kind of get a sense, oh, people like this idea. They're willing to commit the time. They want to come along to the research. They want to have a portfolio piece themselves that they can use for performance evaluations. So you begin to have a sense that like people want to do this and you've got a champion. Then you're just bringing people along for the whole journey. So maybe they can't come to every interview you do, but you ask them to come to a handful. Maybe they're not sleeves rolled up helping you do the analysis, but you have a meeting and you say, oh, let me give you a peek at what we're coming up with in the analysis. Does this feel like it's helpful? Is any of this like surprising to you? We're thinking about making a journey map that's gonna like, we think these are the phases and we think these are the key moments of truth. Does that sound right? Is there anything here that's surprising to you? So every opportunity you are bringing people along that journey. And in my course, I go into a lot of detail about the types of people you partner with. So there's your main co-pilot, who hopefully if you're a designer, your co-pilot's a researcher. If you're a researcher, your co-pilot's the designer that's going to make the map. But maybe you've got a co-pilot who's a product manager. Or you've got collaborators who are not doing as much sleeves rolled up, but they're coming to research sessions and so forth. So you want to really think about who are the people I'm asking to be involved in this and what is their role, and bring those people along in the journey as best as you can. And I give people peeks through the entire process. One of my projects I'm most proud of was research that I did for Spotify, where we actually created a set of personas that they were still using for innovation 7 years later. Why were they still using them 7 years later? Because they totally bought into the personas. You can Google those personas. They took them out on the conference and podcast and blog circuit, so they've been shared fairly broadly. But we had a war room on the 5th floor of their headquarters in Stockholm. And as soon as you came out of the elevator, you were looking at this design studio with just this sea of sticky notes. And people would wander up and be like, what are you guys doing here? And we'd give them an overview of the project, and we'd say, what are you particularly interested in? We'd do a little wall walk. And it started building so much buy-in. And it also brought buy-in that, like, personas are not just made up. Like, there's actually, if you create a good set of personas, there's some rigorous analysis that goes into those. Same with journey mapping. Let people see, like, here's the process we're going through to land on this journey map. And it helps build buy-in. So there's a lot that you can do to build buy-in through the experience, but you really don't want to think about it as just a one and done collaboration.
Awesome. So Robbie asked if we're going to get a copy of this deck.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yes, absolutely.
I can send a link to the deck also with the recording. We're at time, and we still had a lot more questions, so I would encourage people to connect with Julie directly and start a conversation. And she's so generous with her knowledge. It's really crazy. I mean, she's worked with really big brands, and she's always willing to teach and learn, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Julie, for your time and your knowledge and sharing that with all of us.
Yes, thanks so much to all of you for coming, and I apologize we didn't get to more questions, but reach out to me anytime.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.